What we'll talk about next is how to put fat or a heavier sense of form on top of a figure. It's a question that I come across or end up getting pretty often. It's a good one. Usually in classes, I'll talk a lot about structural fat, fat around the face and deposits and how it's part of the structure of our features. I find that there's, lots of great anatomy books, and not all have a lot on where the body accumulates, stores, holds fat, and then how what its impact might be on anatomy. So I just pulled out a couple that I think are useful, and I've put them here to the side. I really like the Anatomy for Sculptors depiction and illustration of subcutaneous fat and how it affects the proportions of the body and the basic design. So that's something you could look at. The image below that is from Elliot Goldfinger's book on anatomy that does the same, and it shows a comparison, not as extensive as what Anatomy for Sculptors shows, but it does show the difference between male and female. Morpho has a book on fat, subcutaneous fat in the figure, and there's a few other pages in every anatomy book, I think, that goes through it. What I'm going to focus on primarily is the challenge of drawing it. So this is a nice pose set from Studio Graphite because it gives you two versions of body type in roughly the same positions. So we could start here and kind of lay in a figure in the middle, because I would mostly approach any drawing, depending on whatever the body type is, with that same approach that we've been looking at, or that I've looked at in terms of my more shape emphasized approach. So I'm not doing the overall quick gesture lay-in. I'm trying to get more at to the gesture, the perspective, and then the connection. So here's my head, here's my neck. And with this approach, you can try to alter and get to that body type shape a little bit more quickly. But I think for this one, I'm gonna create that average lay-in and then maybe build it up. This way it gives you another opportunity to see that lay-in done. But the point here is that it could really be either body type, the lay-in at this point. So I'm looking at both. My head is the basic shape. Its tilt is slightly leaned back. Its turn is past profile, slightly past profile, so turning towards that back 3/4, which is why I gave you so much of that skull in the back. The neck is the triangle shape that is leaning forward, and it is perspectively pulling away, moving away from you. I follow the spine as the center line through that and into the 7th cervical vertebrae, and then we can do our 1. So when I'm doing a rib cage front or back, or a torso shape front or back that's turning, I'm mostly looking for that, again, like we started the shoulder tilt, the pelvic tilt, and then you're looking for your spine or pit of the neck, which is your center, and then the width, which you could change based on the body type. But when it's moving away in any direction, what you're gonna find is that you'll have a shape, but the center point gets closer or further to one side or the other. So if it's turning, maybe it gets closer to this side, and that starts to suggest a rotation. So you could start with that, like here I could maybe put it here, and then my center lines for these are always S or C curves if turned, right? If they're just straight on front or back, it'll be a straight. And then think about your distance, right? Because this is more shape based, so it does participate a little bit more with a measurement. So maybe it's here, and then this one's just like, I guess just past the face. And then what's your gesture line? I'm gonna use an S curve. This one I think is more of a C curve. So that would be there. Here's my torso shape. And now at the bottom, so I've looked at my tilt, I've done my gesture, what's the shoulder tilt and its difference relative to the pelvic tilt. And that has a weight on this side, so that's going higher. And then maybe inside, now we can start to kind of bring out some of the form a bit more. So here's where I think that rib cage would be. If you want, you could also just leave it as a tube, but I'm just gonna give myself a quick rib cage check. Here's my pelvis. And I'm just trying to push that pelvis back and out a little bit more. And now I could move into the legs or arms, really whatever you want. Back of these legs, or the legs from the back, both are S curves to me. So I'm gonna say, let's start here. And what I like to do when starting the legs from a view like this would be, let's get that width. Again, how wide is it? Well, it looks like it comes to here. And that's great because I like to be able to use these center lines to move all the way down and through a form. So look, I'm using this spine, but I'm just continuing that rhythm down and into the ankle and foot. And that would be my, let's just say that's the heel width. And then for the back of that, I'll do a straight, and then let's do a curve for the lower leg, and that would taper into an ankle. And then I get my proportion finally. So I could double check, like, does this feel like half? Is that half? And then do I have my 4 heads? If not, with this approach, I'm always just like pushing things in, like closing things down. Maybe this needs to come in a little bit or something. So I could always just like turn that in, bring this width down. This leg would be more outstretched or stretched, so I'm just gonna move that same shape, or think of that same shape in its attachment. Like where's the width? Where does it hit that pelvis? This one will have less of a rhythmic connection to that overall. So maybe that goes forward like this. I'm using some wrapping lines on this one a little bit earlier. And then, so picking up on the S design from this into the flow of this here. So front to back, down slightly in front of the other leg, and then here. So maybe that's a little broad in terms of the gap or the distance between the legs, but it's not awful. Let's give a bit of a corner to the back of that heel. Okay, then the last thing we need is just some arms. So let's put in our scapula. So I can see the scapula, that medial border in both. So I tend from the back to look at the upper arm and shoulder in this type of lay-in. I think of it like an axe handle. So that looks like the axe, and then the handle would be the humerus, wherever it is. So let's say it's going here. That's raised. This side, it's pushed away a little bit more. So anytime this is foreshortened, the scapula on the back, so we have this side pretty broad. If I want to move it away, I'm going to diminish this length. So I just made that shorter, squeeze the proportion, and then make that shape kind of reflect a bit of a turn. And then that would be here, goes down to about the bottom of that rib cage. So there's the neck, back of the head. So that's my form. There's my gesture, my lay-in for this. I think you could tell it could be either one. It could be you could eventually make it be the narrow body type on the left, right? I could do that by just kind of pushing in some of the areas of the tube and thinning parts, but our challenge is going to be to try to build it up and see if we can deal with some of those areas of the subcutaneous fat on top. So let's mute this a little bit more and just kind of erasing it so that we have a bit more. And then we could start to think about, maybe we could even identify those pockets of fat as areas to build up. The goal for me essentially is that I'm building form. I'm sculpting form on top just like I would muscle. So what I find to be important is, if we think of fat, it's basically drapery. It's going to show or exhibit more of the hard versus soft dynamic, just like clothing would. So areas that are bony, like shoulder, up here, top of a form if an arm's lifted, those areas are going to tend to be straighter or more abrupt. And then areas that are affected more so by gravity might be more dropped or curved, right, or sagging. In other words, I think there's more of a visible impact of gravity on the form of the figure with fat. Or with muscle or a lean body type, that tends not to be the case quite as much. So in this one, maybe we'll start to think of, right, without making it overly anatomical, you can just think about the relationship of form to form. I'm thinking about let's say any part of the body, rib cage, arm, leg, it doesn't really matter. Right? So let's say that's a form, but then I want to think of the amount of fat over that as something as an additional volume. So it's this in addition to. So relative to my figure, the process or the exercise here is trying to see if I can map one area on top of the other. So in that way, we just make it the same drawing problem or drawing exercise as we would muscle. So that goes around like this. So it's all wrap and overlap. So how would that start to look? Well, let's do it here. Let's just do a pass where we add it. So I'm seeing this shape. Usually there's not going to be the amount of fat develop around the joints. That's like a nice thing that's illustrated in the Anatomy for Sculptors book. As far as something that is materially different, you could see the pads of fat based on where they female versus male here. There's obviously more in the area of the hip or stomach, right, if we compare one to the other in that illustration. But you could just also go, without having to make a generalization, body type by body type, and start looking at where those areas are. So I'm noticing here, and that's moving around and kind of filling in front. And then that's on top of another that would become more structured into the hip. And so I'm losing hard surface here. I always try to reserve that little diamond around the area of the sacrum as something that's avoiding it. And then we would have the gluteal area. This is stretched, so this whole form kind of drops the way that I'm seeing it. There's fat that would be around the inner thigh, outer hip, right? So we're kind of mapping it in this way. And then the challenge from here would be, how can we reintroduce it to the basic structure that's underneath? So that would be just like we did down here. Now I'm just shifting back into that mode.
Learn from Michael. Check out his Introduction to Figure Construction and Head Construction courses on Proko.com. Both courses have hours of demonstrations, lectures, and student critiques. If you're interested, click on the links in the description. Thanks.